tell me what you've made of this response where, major donors to American colleges are looking and seeing that they are utterly infected with, this anti-Israel worldview that borders on genocidal. What do you make of all of it?
I think the first important thing to see is that the current wave of woke neo-Marxist plus radical Islamic revolutionary fervor on the campuses and in the streets of many American and European cities. First thing to notice is that this is a repeat of the George Floyd riots from 2020. We remember that George Floyd was an excuse that was used to conduct 6 months of urban rioting, semi-warfare in some cases, where the goal was to get the goal of the revolutionary left was to put systemic racism on the agenda as something that no one in the United States could ignore. Right? That was their goal. Their goal was to say, look, there's systemic racism. If you don't deal with it, primarily by electing Biden instead of Trump, but if you don't deal with systemic racism, we're going to make your lives complete hell. We're going to make this country completely dysfunctional, which they did a pretty good job of. And, I had actually thought the whole time that was happening, I thought Americans want law and order. There's going to be a law and order backlash. They'll reelect Trump, but that's not what happened. What happened is that the American public caved. The American public said, we just want quiet. Biden will get the riots to stop as soon as he's elected. So they voted for Biden, and that's exactly what happened. Now, so flash forward 3 years, we're now watching the same exact playbook being organized and funded by the same people. We're watching the same playbook, except instead of systemic racism, the slogan is genocide in Palestine. And it's exactly the same model. In the first round in 2020, the oppressor was whiteness. White Americans, Christian Americans, conservative Americans. That was the oppressor who was being delegitimized and expelled from civilized society in America as illegitimate. Now we're doing the same thing, and it's interesting that they've taken the genocide in Palestine, genocide in Gaza slogan, and they are using it as an extension of the war in Israel to delegitimize and expel Jews from, they call all Jews Zionists often, but they're talking about all the major Jewish organizations in America and Jewish communities, Jewish students and professors on the campuses. And it's part of the same exact revolution as what we've been seeing for years. One of the things that makes it interesting is that, as you know, the majority of Jews in the United States and in Europe are liberals. And I want to be clear. I myself have never been a liberal for not for 5 minutes. I grew up in a home where liberalism was not considered a reasonable worldview for Jews or for anybody else. So so I'm a non-liberal from birth. But most American Jews are liberals. I understand that this isn't always easy for everyone to understand, especially if they're not Jewish. That for the most part, liberal Jews live with this kind of false consciousness where they think that liberalism is actually going to be good for Jews, and for many decades, it was possible to make that argument. I didn't believe it, but people believed it. And now all of a sudden, it's turning out that the lefty allies that many of these liberal Jews have spent their lives with many of them are just Hamas supporters. They, when they hear genocide the Jews, or when they see actual acts of murder, dismemberment, gang rape, torture of a kind and a cruelty that has been surpassed nowhere. When they see these things, they look around. As Jews, they feel pain, and they look around and they see that many of their friends are Hamas supporters, and they thought that their liberal friends, their progressive friends, were moral, decent people, and that they were all, we liberal Jews are working with the liberal Christians and the other liberals, and we're bringing, peace to the world and justice to the world with our liberalism. Now suddenly they've discovered that what they're bringing with their liberalism is an openness to having the Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood at the table. And when you have terrorists who aspire to mass murder at the table, you have to accommodate them, and that's what's happening at these universities. Is that the woke neo-Marxist alliance, which includes radical Islam as an integral, crucial part of that alliance, that's taken over the universities. And after 2020, after the Cultural Revolution of 2020, the universities are under the thumb of the woke neo-Marxists and their radical Islamic allies. And we just saw it on television this week. Three university professors, presidents of universities from Harvard and Penn and MIT, unable to accept the idea that having thousands of students marching through your campus, calling for genocide of Jews, they're unable to see that as being, harassment of the Jewish and or Israeli students on the campus. I think that should tell Americans everything that they need to know. I mean, I don't expect Americans necessarily to always be looking out for the interests of Jews as Jews, but I do think that that America is facing something that we haven't seen in our lifetimes, which is an organized pro-genocide organization, which at the moment is fanning the flames of Jew hatred all across the United States and in Britain and in Europe. But let's not be stupid about this. It's not going to stop with the Jews. I mean, before they took on the Jews, they took on the straight white males, and they're not going to stop until they delegitimize and expel all of us.
So that's actually a useful segue, because there's a bunch of sort of adjacent critiques to part of this response that have been percolating. One of which is that all of the anti-woke, pro-free speech people were hypocrites. We've been talking for years about safe spaces on campus, and now the pro-Israel right wants safe spaces, and it was never a principled stand. What do you make of that criticism?
Well, the problem, as almost always with the American right, is people need to decide whether. I'm talking about people on the right. They need to decide whether they are liberals or whether they're conservatives. Mm-hmm. And I mean, there's plenty of people who call themselves the right, and they're anti-woke, but their worldview is liberal, and so they have this illusion that there's such a thing as absolute free speech, and or an absolute right to demonstrate. And if you're a conservative, which is to say that you're actually a realist about politics. Liberals are not realists about politics. Liberalism is about designing a utopia in which everyone gets to say what they want, or everyone gets perfectly equal treatment. Everyone is perfectly free, no matter what they espouse. Conservatives are realists. Real conservatives are realists, and a realist says, well, it was all very nice and good to be defending an absolute right of freedom of speech. But by the way, I've never defended an absolute right of freedom of speech. But I understand people saying, look, let's just let everybody say whatever they want to say. Well, guess what? That's not always realistic. It's realistic in a country, in a society where everybody respects one another enough, even if they hate one another, they respect one another enough to stay within the guidelines of democratic procedures, peaceful transitions of government. You have debates. One side says what they think, the other side says what they think, and then you vote. Right? All of that's beautiful when it works, but we are dealing now with an opponent. I mean, I would say an enemy because they declare themselves to be our enemies. We're dealing now with an enemy that uses a democracy and uses the old liberal regime in order to build a power base for a violent fascist movement whose goal is the violent overthrow of the American Constitution and the American way of life. And I don't know how much more evidence people need of that, but it is absolutely not the case, I say as a conservative, that America simply needs, because it's been a liberal country, simply needs to say every freedom that is guaranteed to good liberals and good conservatives who participate in the democratic system, every such freedom also needs to be given to terrorist organizations, which organize teach-ins and educational efforts to advance the cause of genocide against Jews, against whites, against whoever it is who's going to stand in their way. And we need to treat them as though they are the normal participants in the democratic process. They are not normal participants. And if we treat them as normal participants, then we're going to lose America and we're going to lose Britain and we're going to lose every country that decides that liberalism means that people who are trying to kill you, who are trying to destroy you, and have proved it amply, are just legitimate participants in the dialogue.
So a second criticism that's been levied is that, a lot of, let's just take, for example, these sort of center-left Jewish billionaires that are getting up in arms about what's going on college campuses. They never had a commensurate response when there was systematic abuse and hatred towards whites on campus over the last 50 years, which has been extremely prevalent as well. And that, frankly, I also think that it would be accurate to say that the unique phenomenon of sort of American left-wing anti-Semitism is a correlated phenomenon to their anti-white hatred as well. It all stems from a very similar worldview that they have. Do you think that's a fair criticism? Why are they caring now and they didn't care before?
Well, I'm not exactly sure what the point of the criticism is. I mean, we know that there are people who disagree with us. We know that there are people who as Nat Cons, that there's lots and lots of parts of American society that are not terribly interested in our friendship. We don't get invited to their get-togethers, and we don't get invited to their platforms, and we don't get to publish books with their publishers. I mean, we know for sure that there are lots of people who don't like us. There's lots of people who disagree with us. Okay, so here we have a moment in which all sorts of I'm focusing liberal Jews, it's just, I know that community very well. I think the same is going to be true for other liberals, for liberal Catholics and liberal Protestants, but let's stay focused on liberal Jews. We have a moment here where a lot of very wealthy, very powerful people are suddenly waking up to something. And there's a minute where they seem to be open to parts of our worldview, maybe to all of our worldview. We don't know where this is going to go. And I'm sort of confused about people who want to sit around and talk about, oh, you didn't help us before. Well, we know they didn't help us before. We know they were liberals. I mean, like, what's the surprise there? The surprise is that you get a liberal Jewish billionaire like Ackman. The surprise is that that he's tweeting that he regrets that he didn't speak up when straight white males were being persecuted. Now, that's a surprise. But so when you meet with Mr. Ackman, are you going to say, "Listen, I'm just so amazed that you weren't as smart as I was all of those years"? Like, is that what you have to say, or are you going to be serious politically and say, we're not in the greatest shape here? Anybody who wants to join our side, in part or in whole, we should be encouraging them, right? I mean, like, what is politics about? It's not about saying "I told you so." It's about building an alliance that's strong enough to be able to defeat our enemies. Come on.
That seems obvious to me.